Are there any questions? There we go. Chris and Patty had covered it. Thank you for stepping up.
I don't think that one's on.
It's on. Switch it to the on.
Oh, that's good. Alright, so whoa, we're getting feedback here or something.
There you go. Can everybody hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
We all have loud mouths. We probably have to talk a lot, so go ahead.
Cool. So all I was going to say is, you mentioned to the gentleman here who was just talking to Conjure. I've already done it.
Kevin.
Great, thank you. You mentioned that you explicitly split out build from push. One of the common patterns that we use, and that I think a lot of companies use, I was wondering how you do without, is using Jenkins as sort of a gateway to push code out, so that not, like anybody can't just like push code, like sort of like give some kind of auditing, some sort of happy path for code to move from development through testing and into production. How do you live without that?
Yeah, so I think this is a problem in general when you have a system that's supposed to be used by everybody and then starts to be able to do really privileged stuff, and then you realize you have to start to lock it down, and then it loses like some of the value that it had in the first place. So we've kind of iterated on this a little bit. We wrote like a custom web service that does promotion to like Heroku, S3, NPM, Python, Ruby gems. And so it's like a defined web service interface. You can push like a promote button in Jenkins, calls a web service, and then the stuff happens. I think we're also considering just setting up like a second Jenkins machine with like more restricted permissions, so that because that has a web service API too. Like Rundeck is another tool that we looked at, but I think we're too small to really use it appropriately. But it's all like the same approach, which is like put the promotion stuff behind an API and let like a smaller number of people manage that, and then let a large number of people use the build system, and give them responsibility to do promotion, but not to actually access all the scripts and secrets that would enable them to do anything that the server can do.
Really decrease things.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Along that line, though, you get role-based access in Jenkins, so you can do the modularization like you're talking about, so that the components are separate and only give control to certain components. So you can still, developers can kick off builds all day long to see how things are going. They can do their commits. Maybe they can even push to QA, which we promote, but that final key, the ability to actually push to production, yeah. You can ratchet that back to some pretty basic role-based access.
So we actually came out of an interesting discussion today on this somewhat similar topic in relation to the cloud. How does, specifically AWS, which we work in, how does that fit? Jenkins is a fine tool for continuous integration and even continuous deployment. I've used this in the past. So what we came up against is we said, hey Nick, can you use the mic? That's unusual to talk about.
Our mic's too loud today.
Okay, so we came out of a discussion today on precisely a related topic to this question, because Jenkins is a perfectly good CI tool. It's even a very good continuous deployment tool. I've used it that way, particularly in data center installations. It's extremely good for that. We're moving wholly to Amazon Public Cloud, and for us the question came up of, well, what does the cloud actually give us? We can have continuous integration and even continuous deployment to dev and QA through Jenkins, to test, as we're now calling it, I've just been reminded, to development and test environments. We can run the test on there. Once that's verified for production, we can cut an image. We can even go as far as removing SSH access into that production AMI. So we spin up instances in the cloud, and the philosophy is, if they exhibit symptoms of illness, you shoot them in the head and spin up a new one. You don't spend time troubleshooting them. There's no reason. coupled with the whole DevOps mantra of high visibility into the application layer, increased monitoring, log stash, centralized logging, this kind of thing. There's no reason for anyone ever to log into a production system. So I think the cloud, and Amazon Cloud in particular, changes the thinking a little bit in how deployment strategies are worked out. And particularly because a deployment doesn't necessarily mean pushing code to an EC2 instance. Sometimes it's spinning up a simple queuing service on Amazon, or spinning up Amazon's new Elasticsearch in place of our Logstash instances that we're currently managing, for instance, down the road. Yeah, that's been relevant. And these kind of things, that Amazon's making available a lot of services that don't depend on spinning up an instance and deploying it. So I think it changes the whole sort of ballgame in that.
And we're even shutting off Puppet in production. Yes. So everything that allows you to access that particular system is dead, done.
Yeah, there's no need to run Puppet because you don't apply any changes. And we had a whole discussion today about in DevOps eating our own dog food. The question came up, well, what if there's a security update? Well, we go through the process. We apply it to Dev, we apply it to QA, we apply it to Prod. We spin up a new instance.
More questions?
Yeah, I guess you talk about the snowflake problem a little bit. And, we're in our huge team. There's a couple of DevOps people here and a bunch of engineers and some senior engineers that obviously oversee some of the changes that come into your environment. Like, what is overall your process for making those changes come into your environment to ensure that you don't have unique systems? What processes do you employ?
Tools. I wasn't allowed to say the tools word.
You can now, Sean.
Oh, I cannot. So one of the things that we're defining with our DevOps manager and our operations team is the ability to actually do changes to Puppet. So one thing that I personally hate is actually hierarchy. All right, I hate it with a passion. I believe that you should actually treat your infrastructure like code, like Puppet says, and actually make your modules have inbound parameters, right? We leverage an ENC. So one thing that we're working on is anytime there's a derivation in, let's say, Tomcat, all right? We've downloaded the Puppet Forge module for Tomcat. We've gone through, we've basically taken the init.pp and we've leveraged it to basically bring everything as an inbound parameter. And let's say we have a new special snowflake that comes along. Well, everything that's already set up in Tomcat has default values. If you didn't pass a parameter into it once before, it already had a value before Puppet was managing it.
So
what we're, what?
You don't involve humans.
Yeah, no.
That's the error, right?
Yeah, well, that's the problem that I had at the beginning of all this, was the fact that he asked me to talk about people, and I personally hate most people that I know, so therefore I didn't know what I was actually going to speak about. But, so, it's not replacing people. We're leveraging people to actually build the configuration, right? You should be able to. I've written bash scripts for most of my life, and obviously it's not been that long. I have a baby face. I am older than I look. But my father was a Tandy sales rep. I've had a computer in my house from the day I was born. So, writing scripts, things of that nature, we've all done that. And it's just taking the same sysadmins that would write those scripts and actually sit down and say, okay, if I needed to replace this on 30 servers, how would I do it in a backwards compatible mode? And what that is that you create a parameter in our Puppet module, you give it a default value, so it automatically is applying that same default value that's already there in Tomcat. And then on top of that, now I can expose it through our UI tool that allows the operations team to actually log into each one of these systems and basically say, okay, this special snowflake, that goes back to the whole concept of having derivation of that is controlled, right? So that I bring up that system, and now I have that parameter available in my UI, and I can actually edit that field. And there's a lot more complex stuff going on that we're actually doing versioning of those ENC records and things of that nature, but it's controlled derivation from what we're saying is, this is how Tomcat needs to be deployed in our environment to make it so it's operationally supportable, right? So if there is a change, then we pass it through basically operations to actually make sure that it's backwards compatible.
Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. And you can take that same concept and take it to the next level and actually have instances or infrastructure as source code as well, right? So we're actually building now, when we go to move to QA, we don't move to a QA, a test instance, but we actually build a test instance. So all of our infrastructure is all CloudFormation code. It's all parameterized, just like we were saying before. So we're actually taking it to that next level as well. So you truly can get that build, so you don't have to, the goal is to not have to touch the individual machines, to not have the variety of building something through the console.
Just one thing on that is the sort of educational role of DevOps within this, because for a certain sector of developers and software engineers who may be highly skilled at what they do, developing Java applications, but have never come across Puppet or configuration management in general, it becomes quite a leap of consciousness to say, hey, what you mean I can't just go in and edit this server XML and expect it to remain the same? Something's going to come along in 30 minutes and clobber it and put it back to what I had. So I think that here's where some of the cultural aspects of DevOps come in. I mean, you have to sit with developers and you have to say, okay, no one's restricting you from making these changes, we're just changing the way in which you do it. And if you actually look at it, you'll see it's a hell of a lot more simple to edit a YAML file than it is to edit XML. But it's a long process. I mean, I agree with the colleague here who said, you know, you're never done with DevOps. I think all down the line, you're always going to find something that's going to come up and bite you in the butt. You know, and I think it's a continuous education process. It's a continuous change in the way we work.
So yeah, I heard you mention staying away from actual tools, so then you mentioned Jenkins for continuous deployment, and then I heard you mention Puppet as well. Are there any other options? I mean, because
Yeah, I was a big fan for years of cruise control. I love it way more than Jenkins. It's just that no one uses it these days.
Code deploy, Amazon.
Now it's code deploy. It got lost. I used to love it because it was XML files. You could actually deploy your management of your infrastructure as code could be managed through code. You just deploy XML files to your cruise control. There was no GUI for people to mess around with and screw things up.
I often hear
That's a quote.
I often hear each of these products, which are great products, right? Puppet's a great product, Jenkins, Chef, they're all great products.
No, they all suck.
Which one sucks?
Perhaps we're not, but I hear there's a little bit of confusion, right? Because you have products like Jenkins, Puppet, Chef, always, you know, talking about in the market how they can do continuous delivery, they can do deployments. But is that so? So I'm just curious to know, you know, from your experience, what your take is on that. Because I hear Chef and Puppet are great at visioning, but not so much about deployment.
I'm going to give over to our tool.
Wow.
But I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear, you know, what your experience is with each of these tools, and what do you find in the market as to when it's effective to get to a continuous delivery.
But I think it goes back to exactly what 3 of us, maybe even 4 of us have already said, which is I can take a screwdriver and get a nail in real easy, right? So all of these tools do things, and it goes back to we actually leverage internally a couple of different tools. We actually have in play, how many people have used Ansible? Right? How many people think Ansible is a replacement for Puppet? Okay, well, I disagree with you, right? You know, you have Puppet to do configuration management. You have Ansible to do your, you know, orchestration management. Each one of these tools do things very, very well, and I think it's finding what fits you and your organization, because none of them do it right for every single organization correctly the same way. It's like, that's all I guess I can say about just choosing the tools that fit your need at that particular time, and then when it stops fitting your need, branch.
So I think I chime in on the same lines, is that a lot of these tools have overlap with each other, right? I mean, Chef or Puppet or Salt, that's what we're using. That's configuration management, but they kind of branch out to the other areas. And then you have, Ansible or whatever other thing. It's more about assembling a set of tools that you are comfortable marrying to your process and committing to. So it really doesn't matter what the tool is. I mean, it's like I don't know. So you have Git and Subversion. You have Git and Mercurial as version controls, and people might argue back and forth, like one's better than the other, I like this one better than that, but both of them are a lot better than using like RC or CVS. So I think it's really select some modern tools that you think you can fit into your process, and then go for it until you need to change to some other tool. I don't think that the particular tool matters so much as you're comfortable fitting that tool into your process and adopting it to do what it's trying to do. And there's overlap, so you choose something, see how far it gets you, and then if you need to, I mean, the idea is that this has made it so that you could easily replace one component or another, replace it.
It's also like, it's confusing because this is an evolving space and a lot of these tools aren't even sure. Speaking as someone who's building out a product in the DevOps space, like everything's moving at the same time. And so yeah, I guess my advice would be to look at the core like capability of the thing that you're using and using it for that. And ideally that means an API. Like if you look at kind of the way I describe like refactoring a big like monolith in Jenkins into a bunch of like interoperating tools that work together, like that really kind of fits into sort of like the Unix philosophy of like tool chains and piping, and that's what I really like about like the 12-factor manifesto is it describes like how to build like services that can be easily like composed, and I think that's something that needs to really be looked at carefully. It's like what's the actual API of the thing as opposed to all the other stuff you might read about it. What does it really do well?
Just one other thing is, I think it's determined to a large degree on your human resources and your staff as well. I mean, if you're a Ruby shop and you've got people who are super comfortable with Chef recipes and stuff, by all means go with Chef. If you're not and you want to recruit some guy off the street as a sysadmin who can take over your configuration management, I would say go with Puppet. To me, that's the division, is that Puppet is much easier to understand. The reason why I sort of only half jokingly said I'm in favor of replacing Puppet with Ansible is because Ansible is the easiest to understand of them all. However, I've seen some really screwed up implementations of Ansible. I've seen equally screwed up implementations of Chef, and I've seen equally screwed up implementations of Puppet. So, you can, if you get some, like I like to think, back in the day when I was automating everything in Bash, any sysadmin would have been able to come in off the street and perfectly understand my Bash code and take over my automation. It's probably not true, but it's a nice thing to think. And I think if there's a weakness in the I kind of understand the format for this meetup being, let's talk about the culture rather than the tools, because I think there's a tendency to get hung up on the tools. I mean, everything calls itself DevOps now, NetApp is suddenly a DevOps tool. Jesus Christ, it was a network monitoring tool for 20 years, now it's suddenly a DevOps tool. And admitted they've done some cool stuff recently with companies they've bought, but it's not a DevOps tool. It gives visibility, which is part of the DevOps platform. Monitoring tool, Dagios, is suddenly a DevOps tool. No, it's a pain in the ass that wakes you up every night. it's not a DevOps tool.
So the point was made earlier that when you're starting out from small, DevOps just kind of do it. Yeah, sure.
So the point was made earlier that when you're small and starting out from nowhere, you just kind of adopt these processes as you go. I'm curious, those of you who are coming from larger environments where you have thousands of employees and you probably can't or don't want to go in and fire everyone who has an old way of thinking because they probably like getting their paychecks. And it's just a nice thing not to fire them. How do you affect that cultural change? It sounds like a couple of you guys have sort of skunks, works, teams coming in and maybe doing the kind of the teaching people who've been there for a while, but how do you make it happen? I'm going to turn this off because it's really...
Yeah, sorry.
Is this where we plead the fifth? No, it goes to, and Mick's probably going to be better at answering this than myself, but it goes down to actually, I think what he's doing is putting together basically a SWAT team to go around and maybe kick down some doors and shoot a few bullets and see who's standing, right? So, some of it might be babysitting and some fatherly mentoring, but some of it will be a little bit rougher. And I think that you can't just go in with the fact that everyone's going to be singing "Kumbaya" by the end of talking to somebody, and there will be decisions made and things of that nature. But
so, can I get that again? I think. So, we're relatively small here, right, in Flip Ski. We're like 125 people, a smaller engineering team. But I think that, like, look at our evolution, like, as a group over the past 5 years. Everybody in here has been won into this DevOps way of thinking. So I think you have an opportunity to win people. You just need to be able to put something in front of them that's pretty compelling. There's a reason that there's interest and buzz surrounding, like, how can we do this better? And, obviously you can't reach everybody, but I think that if you identify those compelling pain points and go after them, that you can convince most people, even if they're locked into a particular way of doing it. That's why we're all here. We're convinced, right?
So, just to